Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Batra Daf Het. We are going to get started today on a big section that's going to deal with charity giving, which is going to be for a few dapim, very interesting dapim, very known that in the first chapter of Bava Batra, there's all this big sugya about charity. I will mention that a little bit later it went up the flashback on from last week, really, about it went up a few days ago. I forgot to mention it on Herod, okay, and kind of the parts that we were missing that, I said, kind of look up in history. So Shulim wrote about it. So you can look up in flashback about that. New content is going to go up later today from Din and Daf about Pidyon Shvuyim, about redeeming hostages, a very relevant topic, which is going to come straight out of today's Daf. And hopefully today or tomorrow, the Gefet will be translated. There was a Gefet also on today's Daf about charity collecting by Rabbi Yochanan, which will be translated into English. I shall have it Schwartz. So hopefully that will go up later today. If not, then tomorrow. I don't know, it hasn't come in yet, but I know that it's working on translation. And it's a very interesting question. And really there in that shiur, it's really, the shiur addresses this topic of, first of all, what charity is doing in here. It's what Gefet really tries to do in the Gefet Shiurim is to analyze a Tosfot and kind of focus on the methodology of how a Tosfot works. So basically it brings a question. In this particular Tosfot, there's four, like from a contradictory sugya, which is very common to Tosfot, and then four answers and how each one methodologically is different. And then the last part of the shiur is all about, well, what's the idea that we can come out of here? What are the concepts that come out of these different answers from a philosophical perspective and what it tells us about charity in general? So fabulous shiur. Highly recommended. We're going to get started now with the bottom of Zion Amud Bet. We were finishing up with this topic. We're really going to start at the top, but I'm going back to the bottom, which is what's the story with Talmidei Chachamim? Are they exempt? And we're going to see that this topic keeps going on because obviously it was a topic they were struggling with. Do we exempt Talmidei Chachamim from paying taxes? And this concept, I want you to just think about it. A lot of what we're going to learn at the very beginning of today's daf is a lot of black and white. And, we all know the world is not so black and white. There's many sugya to talk about, tzaddik v'ralo, rasha v'tovlo. And yet the sugya, or at least some of the opinions in the sugya, are going to be with this very black and white approach. Talmidei Chachamim learn Torah, therefore they are protected. Therefore, they don't need protection from the enemy, because when the enemy comes, they're not going to get to them. Okay, which we know in reality, unfortunately, does not actually figure, right? It doesn't work that way. So it's a big question how the rabbis can get away with saying this in such a simplistic way when it's clear, and not only is it clear to me and you, but it's clear to the Gemara as well. When the Gemara says, lots of cases they say, here it doesn't come up, but we see Masim B'chol Yom, we see this happens every day, that it does happen, and it's not so simple like it says. Why they don't ask that is a good question, but we do see there are dissenting opinions. So I'll just remind you, Rabbi Yehuda Nesia had started, who is that? That's the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nesia. They were both Nesiim. To differentiate between them, which one we're talking about, they call the second one Nesia instead of Hanasi. So the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nesia, we're going to have all sorts of stories of Rabbi Yehuda Nesia today. The grandson said, Talmidei Chachamim are not exempt from taxes. They have to pay. To which we saw Reish Lakish, who said in front of Rabbi Yochanan, they do have to pay, and he quoted a pasuk, and then Rabbi Yochanan said, why don't you learn from this pasuk? And that's what we were up to. We say Reish Lakish understood that pasuk differently, starting from the third word on today's daf. Reish Lakish savar kedidarish Rava, ani cholma zo knesi Yisrael, shadai kemigdalot elu batei knesiot u'batei midrashot. It's not the Torah and the Talmidei Chachamim that stand as protection that's referenced in that pasuk. It's the Choma, the wall is the Jewish people. Rashi explains what about the Jewish people protects themselves? Well, they say because we protect ourselves, we put up a wall by not intermarrying, and that we keep within ourselves, and that's our protection. Shadai kemigdalot, what's our, how do we, again, these are just different terms for protection, either a wall or a tower. That's batei knesiot u'batei midrashot, which give them the yinikah, the nursing that they need, right, to keep them learning and davening, and that's what keeps them strong. So that's why he didn't use that pasuk, and that's why he chose a different pasuk. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish don't disagree. They just disagree about which pasuk do we learn it from, this exemption for Torah scholars. But we're going to continue here because Rav Nachman, some people say it's Rav Hanan, Bar Rav Chisda, Rama Kraga Arabanan. He did put a tax on the rabbis. So again, we'll see there's this pull in two different directions, even though I did tell you yesterday that the poskim hold like the Reish Lakish approach and like we're going to see in a minute, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's approach, but there are dissenting opinions among the rabbis. Amalei Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Now here he comes with a very strong retort to what he said, and he said, no way can you put taxes on the scholars, and avarta deoraita ad nevi'e v'ad. You right now went against the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. He's basically going to pull out a pasuk from each of the books of each of the sections of the Torah and say each of these sections shows that Torah scholars do not have to pay taxes. Obviously, it doesn't talk about it directly in these psukim, but we're going to come to it from these other psukim. Let's go through. Adoraita, the Torah. Dichtiv. This is in Ha'azinu, which is the shira at the end of the Torah. Moshe says, Af chovev amim kol kedosha biyadecha. Amar Moshe lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So how are we going to understand this pasuk? Ribono shel olam, afilu b'sha'a she'ata mechabev amim. Okay, Af chovev amim. So much of this section is going to feel very relevant considering the situation that we're in right now, presently in the middle of a war, when God loves the enemy, right? The other nations, which basically means God is going to bring destruction upon us. Kol kedosha v'yu biyadecha, but all your holy people will be in your hands, meaning God will protect them. So when God is allowing the Gentiles or our enemy to attack us, God will protect the holy ones. How do we know the holy ones are Torah scholars? Heim tukula raglecha, Tani Rav Yosef, elu, because that's the continuation of the pasuk. Heim tukula raglecha. What does that pasuk mean? Well, Rav Yosef brings a brayta. Elu talmidei chachamim shemechatetim ragleihem mi'ir le'ir. They stomp on the ground by walking from city to city, country to country, lamod Torah. Okay, they're constantly walking around, going to learn Torah. Yisami dabrodecha, that's the continuation. Why are they walking from place to place? How do you know it's to learn Torah? Because lisavalitem b'diburotav shel makom. Yisabi dabrodecha, they're talking about your words. So they do, they learn Torah. Okay, so that's the pasuk. Now, by the way, this doesn't prove you don't have to pay taxes. This just proves that you are protected. Now, it's a jump to say, and I want you to think about this, particularly in light of we're getting to the charity sugyot. And I think there's a connection between them, because this sugya is basically saying, and we're going to see it explicitly in a little bit, that if you don't need to benefit from something, then you don't need to pay for it. Okay? If you don't need it, you don't pay for it. Charity is the exact opposite, right? You as an inhabitant of the city have an obligation. We're even going to see it's a serious obligation to support the poor of your city. Now that's a case where you have to put money into something that you're not benefiting from at all. So why is it different in terms of protection of the city, right? Shouldn't you say, well, you should partake in it because it's help, right? Even if, okay, number one, you have to make the first assumption, which is you're protected anyway and nothing's going to happen to you, which unfortunately, right, we know it's not true. That's number one assumption. Number two assumption is the fact that you don't need the protection of the city means you don't have to share in the costs of it, which is another question. Right? Why do we make that equation? And again, like I said, that staka sugya is the opposite. It's even though you don't need it, you have to give it. So why wouldn't we say that for everything? Could be, that they, by the way, one possible way of understanding all this is, now it's not true across the board, but many Talmidei Chachamim didn't have money, right? And they weren't business people, they were learning. So if you're learning and you're not a business person, the business people can afford to do it, whereas people learning can't afford to do it. Again, that is not necessarily the perfect foolproof argument. One can argue with that as well, balance it, learn Torah and get a job and be able to afford things. Anyway, it could be that the part of the reason for exempting them was because they were very poor. So let's keep going on. So that was the Torah. It's very hard to understand. In the context of Hosea, we're talking about here when the pasuk before talks about going after some beloved woman. So, like when you're, what's the word, to pursue a woman, something like that. So, gamki, it's nuva goyim. If you try to pursue Gentile women, you will be gathered. You'll start to be less in number. Okay, it seems like in a completely negative pasuk, but we're going to darshan this a little differently and interesting. This is a kind of funny way. Amar ula pasuk ze b'lashon aramit ne'emar. The word yitnu is not a Hebrew word; it's an Aramaic word. What's yitnu? Tana. It means to learn. Yishnu. Eat, and the way it's understood is there's the beginning part, which is positive, and the second part, which is negative. How does it work? Gam ki itznu vagoyim ata kapsen. If you learn, okay, tnu kulu, itnu kulu, if goyim means like the whole nation, if the whole nation learns, then God will collect you and take you out of exile and bring you back to Israel. If everyone becomes Torah scholars, you'll all be brought back to Israel. Ata kapsen. Im ma'atem, and that's why it says vayachelu me'at. If you're going to be small in number, who's going to learn? Then yachelu, they take the word ma'at out from the context. Yachelu mimasa melech v'sarim, which means you will be exempt from paying the tax to the king and the officers. And there you have. Now this is more direct. Last pasuk we showed from the Torah was just saying you're protected. You don't need protection. This one's actually saying you're going to be exempt. Those who learn, if there's only a small number who learn, then those who learn are going to be exempt. By the way, this seems to indicate the exemption is in chutz la'aretz. And not all the sources talk about this. When we're talking about taxes, we're talking about taxes to Gentile authorities, not necessarily to a Jewish government or Jewish sovereignty, which again, some of the sugyot indicate that too, but this one certainly talks about when you don't make it to Israel and you're living out abroad, then you'll be exempt from the taxes they put upon. Adichtuve, where in the Ketuvim? Dichtiv, minda velo v'halach, which in a second they're going to say are all different types of taxes. Lo shalit lemirma alehom. This also is more clear about taxes. Will not be put upon you. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, this is a passage from Ezra. It's actually referring to the Levites, not to the Torah scholars, but they make an analogy, right? Levites were busy working in the temple, so they were exempt. Likewise, the Torah scholars are learning in the Beit Midrash, they're exempt. Minda zomanat hamelech, that's the tax the king puts upon you. Velo zo kesef gulgalta, that's the head tax. Halach zo arnona, which is property tax. Could be property like land tax, that's what arnona is today. Could be also property like on certain items like tea tax or whatever it might be. Okay, so those were the three psukim that basically Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said that Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda was going against by taking taxes from the Torah scholars. Rav Papa Rama Karya Chadita Ayatmi. Now we're moving on to the orphans, although we're going to get back to the Torah scholars. He put a tax for the Karya. What's Karya? That's for digging wells. They would dig wells to get water. So he would put the tax to dig a new well, Chadita is new, a new well on the atonement. Orphans had to pay for that too. We always see orphans are a certain protected part of society that sometimes doesn't have to pay for things. Well, they have to pay for that. Amalei Rav Shisha Brid Rav Idi Rav Papa. There's a problem here. Dilma lo mitvil. When you pay money, and this happens to us many times, we pay money for something, but it won't necessarily work, right? You put money in investment, and maybe it'll be successful, maybe it won't. Now, when you put that money in an investment, it's okay if in the end you don't get any money back because you know going in that might happen. And from the beginning, you're willing to possibly take a loss. But Yatomim can't do that because they are young. We're talking about orphans underage, and they can't do what we call mechila. They can't say, oh, well, if it doesn't work, it's okay. I'm willing to give my money anyway, because they don't have the knowledge to do that. So what if they don't find water when they would dig wells? Maybe they got to water, maybe they didn't. And then the money went to waste. Now, other people can do that and give the money because they can just say, I'm okay with that. I know in the beginning, I'm willing to pay the money in the hopes that we'll get to water. But the orphans can't do that. So don't worry. We take the money from them. And if we find water, great. If we don't, we give them back their money. So we can force them to give the money. But if it doesn't work, then we have to give them back their money. Amar Rav Yehuda. Hakol. Okay, so Rav Papa basically said orphans have to pay also for digging wells. Rav Yehuda says Hakol le'egale gapa afilu miyatme. Everybody has to give money for the support of the city, for the protection of the city, for the gates of the city, even orphans. Aval Rabbanan lo tzricha netiruta. Only the rabbis have this exemption, back to our theme, because they don't need protection. Hakol lekarya patya, afilu me Rabbanan. But everyone has to give money for digging wells, even the rabbis. Why? Because the rabbis need the water just like everybody else. We actually saw the sugya before in Bava Metzia. It's only if they don't go out and actually dig them themselves. Meaning, if people have to all give money into a pot for paying for the digging of the wells, the Torah scholars have to do that as well. But if the tax is, like Shlomo Melech, if you remember, imposed a tax on the people, they all had to come work for X amount of months in order to build the temple. If it's a tax like that, you have to go out and dig the wells. Rabbanan la b'nei mepach b'chlos, that's beneath their kavod. We don't make the Torah scholars go out and dig the wells themselves. So only if it's a monetary tax, not if it's a physical tax. Rebbe patach otzarot b'shnei batzarot. We're now going to have a fascinating story about Rebbe, a little bit troubling. He, or at least at the end, is a happy ending, but the beginning is quite troubling. There was a drought, and Rebbe opens up the storehouses of the, what was meant for charity, opens up to everybody, but we'll see in a minute, not really everybody. Amar yikansu ba'alei mikra, ba'alei mishnah, ba'alei talmud, ba'alei halacha, ba'alei agada, aval amei haaretz lo yikansu. He said, but I'm only giving out money to Torah scholars or anyone who learns, can learn anything, I don't care, but if you're an Am Haaretz and you don't learn, you can't get food. That's a little strange, right? Generally, if you have a soup kitchen, you don't check people's, you check, maybe you check, are you poor or not poor? And you do a little background check to make sure that they're not just trying to get free food, but you certainly don't check, do they keep mitzvot, do they not keep mitzvot? It's one of the areas where we really don't distinguish. And it's very interesting, and we're going to have to, obviously the Gemara is going to ask later and give us an answer why Rebbe did this. But first we're going to hear the story without understanding why he did this. The story gets more interesting because Dachak Rabbi Yochanan ben Amram v'nichnas. Rabbi Yochanan ben Amram, who's a rabbi, Torah scholar, happens to be a student of Rebbe. Rebbe is Rabbi Yehuda Nesia, pushes himself in. Okay, what's going to be clear here is disguises himself as an Am Haaretz. I guess he wasn't so happy with what Rebbe was doing. Amar lo, Rebbe parnaseni. So he goes to his rabbi who doesn't recognize him and says, please support me. Give me food. Amar lo, bini karita. Did you learn Torah? Amar lo, lav. No, I didn't. Shanita. Did you learn Mishnah? Amar lo, lav. No. Im came b'meh parnasecha. So why do you want me to support you if so? Amar le, parnaseni pakele v'chaorev. This is a great line. He says, look, the dogs and the ravens eat, right? What do they eat off of? Whatever God gives them, basically. God supports the orvim and the klavim, who are the worst of the animals. So let's make that analogy. If God is supporting them, it's almost like saying, who are you to play God? And and if you're going to play God, well, play God like God does, be like God. God supports even those terrible, low life animals. Of course, right? You should support me. Rebbe is actually convinced. Parnaseh, so that's why I said has a happy ending, at least so far. We're getting there. We'll get to an even better ending soon. But he says, okay, I'll support you. I'm convinced. You make a good argument. But what happened here, before we get the good ending, we get a little bit of a dip in the story. But Nafak, after he leaves, Yativ Rebbe become its star. So this student of Rebbe's walks out of the room, and Rebbe says, what did I just do? Says, Amar, oili shenatata pitila Am Haaretz. I can't believe I just gave my bread. Now, it doesn't mean my bread that I could have eaten. It means I could have supported Torah scholars with it. Instead, I gave it to this Am Haaretz. And he was very upset about it. Amar lepanav Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe. But his son, Rabbi Shimon, had a bit of a perspective and said, for some reason, I don't know why he thought this, but it's a Talmudic story, so maybe that's why. Shema Yonatan ben Amram Tamitahu. Maybe it was your student, Yonatan ben Amram, who did this. Now, he comes up with a reason. Why would he do this? Maybe he didn't want to use his Torah, the respect of Torah that he gained, as a way to benefit himself. In other words, there's something wrong with this model, even though maybe, okay, let's try to think of why Rebbe had this model. I guess he felt that if I have, this is always the question people ask. If you're a charity, right, and one of these moral ethical dilemmas, you have X amount of money, and there's way more people that need the money. So who are you going to give it to first? And his priority was Torah scholars. You can hear that because he says, can't believe I just took money, bread out of someone else's mouth, gave it to an Am Haaretz, when I could have given it to someone who according to him, their life was valued more. Now you might disagree with his value judgment, whether that's true or not, but that was his thinking. So, but he said, you're creating a different problem, which is now people are using Torah to basically get supported. And that's a problem, right? To use the kvod of Torah to get benefit. Maybe that's what your student was doing. He didn't want to do that. So he basically convinced you for some other reason to give him food, but not using the kvod of Torah. That's a problem. So Badku, there was just a suggestion, but Badku Eshkach, and it turns out they found out really that was the case. Amar Rebbe Yikansu Akol. So Rebbe changes his mind and says everybody can come in. Now, there's a debate about why this is. Either Rebbe realized that this was a problem of what he created, that he created a situation, right? There was a backlash, which is people are now using Kavod Torah and benefiting from that, and that's a separate problem. So one solution actually created a problem in a different area. Some people say that he just allowed everyone in because he really wanted to feed Torah scholars and was worried that maybe other Torah scholars would disguise themselves as a Me'aret, not wanting to use Kavod Torah, and it was just his way of giving more food to Torah scholars. Possible. I'd rather go with option one, saying that he really changed his way and realized that this was not a good system. Why did Rebbe think so in the first place? Well, Rebbe Latame, he goes l'shitato, which we're going to see in another story. Tama Rebbe ain't poranu bala olam ela b'shvila me'aretz. Well, Rebbe believed that now remember, this isn't just random charity. This is, we're giving charity because it was a drought. Why did the drought come? Well, it was the fault of the Amei Haaretz. So if I have to choose, here it's a different values discussion, not whose life is worth more, but who brought this problem upon us. If you really believe, again, everything's so black and white, well, which again, we know it's not. But if the Amei Haaretz brought this tragedy upon us, then if I'm going to support people, I'm going to support the people who didn't bring the tragedy upon us and this drought upon us, and therefore I'm going to support the Talmidei Chachamim first before I support the Amei Haaretz. Now, here's a story that highlights this. Again, a very black and white story. Again, Talmudic stories are often black and white trying to get off messages, but again, it's complicated because the message they're getting off is that things are black and white and we know they're not. So I'll just introduce it with that, but let's get to our story. They put a tax on the people in Tiberia. So people went to Rebbe and they said, look, they put a big tax on us. The rabbis should also be part of this. Amar lahu, lo. He said, no. This, by the way, is an extension. Before we talked about taxes to protect the city, this is already something different. Some other tax they put upon us. So they should join. And he said, no, I'm not taking the money from the Torah scholars. Amrule Arkinan. So they said to him, this group of people that came to Rebbe said, fine, we're going to run away. So we don't want to pay this. So we're just going to leave town. And it'll be left on the Torah scholars. So Amar lahu, he says, care, go run away. So Arku Palgehon. So some of them left the city. Dalyu Palga. Well, for the amount of people left the city, let's assume Palga's half, they reduced the tax by half. Because they saw there were less people, so they reduced the tax. Atuanu Palga Kameh to Rebbe. Okay, well, the half that was left goes to Rebbe, minus the Torah scholars, and says, Amrele, Litvu Rabbanan Bahadan. Again, they said, okay, we still have this tax upon us. The rabbis should, this is like another group of people said, the rabbis should also pay with us. Amar Lahu Lo, he said, no way, no how. Arkina, and they said, fine, we're going to run away. Aroku, he says, go for it, go run away, I don't care. Arkukulu, they all left. Pashahu Koves, there was only one guy left in town besides the Torah scholars, he was a launderer. Shadyua Akoves, they put a tax on the Koves. Arak Koves, the Koves runs away. Paka Kalila, and there's no more tax. As soon as they ran away, and all that was left was Torah scholars, the authorities took off the tax. Okay, so that's a really black and white story, and what Rebbe assumed from there, see why he made this assumption, if that story really was true. It's clear it's only because of the Amei Haaretz and not the Torah scholars. Now we're going to go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah had set up, and from here we're going to get into the charity sugya. The Mishnah had set up that there's 12 months for living in the city. Once you live in the city for 12 months, you already have to partake in the costs of building all the support mechanisms for the city to protect the city. So year 12 months. Now we're going to bring a contradiction from another source. Urimini. Now we're on a totally different topic. This is called Ir Hanidachat. Ir Hanidachat is a city, talks about in the Torah, that all the inhabitants go worship Avodah Zarah. And then what happens? If an individual by themselves on their own worships Avodah Zarah, you get stoned. And nothing happens to your property. But if you're a city in Ir Hanidachat, you get a communal punishment, which is, number one, you don't get skila, which is the severe punishment. You get saif, you get killed by the sword. Everyone in the city gets killed by the sword. And all the money all the property and possessions of the town get burned. So now the question is, if you join this Ir Hanidachat, but you're a temporary resident, at what point are you considered an individual? At what point are you considered part of this Ir Hanidachat? So we have people who have these caravans with donkey drivers and camel drivers, Ha'overet mimakom lemakom, they wander from place to place. V'lana batochan, they sleep in some town. V'ut chayim ahem, and they start worshiping. You think of like a cult, right, where they get everybody to go believe in something, and they happened to have been there when the cult was active, and they got everyone to do avodah zarah, and they did it as well. So, since they're just temporary, right? They get skila and their mamon, nothing happens to their possessions, not like the rest of the city, even though they did it with the city, but they weren't inhabitants of the city. But if they were already there for 30 days, not a year, 30 days, and here's a contradiction, then they become like part of the ir, part of the city. So, there's a difference here. When you have to pay the money for the protection of the city, that's when you're called a ben ir. You're a member of the city. If you're going to be judged as an ir nidachat, according to the Pesukim, it's yoshvei ha'ir. Yoshvei just means you dwell there. To dwell, and it's enough to say 30 days. Kedetanya, just like it says, and here we're going to make a distinction between b'nei ir and yoshvei ir, or anshe ha'ir. So hamudar hana'ame anshe ha'ir, this is a totally different topic. This is if I say I'm not going to benefit from any of the people of the city. People of the city is like the b'nei ha'ir, the people who are considered real inhabitants of the city. So who's included in this? Who can I benefit from? Only people who were living there at least for 12 months. If they were living there for less, I could benefit from them. But if I said mi yoshvei ha'ir, those who dwell in the city, so then it's a different, right? It's 30 days. Now they're going to ask another question on this. And from here, we're going to get to charity. What is Yubel Chodesh for everything then? Right? Forget other than ir and nidachat. But here we have a braita that says no. Here we get into charity. If you're living in a city for 30 days, you already have to give to the soup kitchen. Shlosha, which basically means bring food that they're going to distribute to poor people. Shlosha chodeshim, once you're living there for 3 months already, you have to give lekupa, you have to give money. Okay, now here it seems that there was a system in place that everybody had to give charity in the city. So if you live in the city for 3 months, you're already obligated to give cash money to the kupat staka, which they use to give to the poor people. We'll see that people get it once a week. People get a weekly stipend. Shisha, 6 months, liksut. You have to give money to help the poor people get clothing. Tisha likfura, 9 months to help them get buried, the poor people. And the last one doesn't have to do with poor people. Shnei masal lepasei il. That's for the protection of the city. So Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, kitsanami manitin shnei masal lechodesh lepasei irtan. So which the answer, no, the tzedakah has different criteria. But notice this braita doesn't contradict our Mishnah because the pasei year is the same basically as the choma and all that, and it's the same thing. And there you see the 12 months. Therefore, this braita doesn't contradict. But from there, we got into all this charity stuff that now we're going to go off on a tangent about. Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Before that, we're going to go to this other thing. Hakol pasei year afilu miyatme. Everyone gives to protection of the city, even the orphans. Aval Rabbanan lo, but still not the rabbis. De Rabbanan lo tzricha nitiruta, as we've said over and over again. The rabbis don't need protection. Amar Rav Papa, the Shiur, the parasha, the turzina, filu miyatme. Okay, these are different parts of elements of support of the city for protection. Aval Rabbanan lo tzricha nitiruta. Klala de milta, the rule is kol milta di ipehana amine afilu miyatme. If you benefit from them, we're even going to take it from orphans. Rabba Ramet Staka Ayatme de Barbar Mirion. Rabba insisted that this family, Barbar Mirion, give charity. It was a family of orphans. He insisted that they take charity. Apparently, they were wealthy. Here we get into our redeeming of hostages. We're going to have a little tangent about that, a very, again, relevant and important topic. We'll see how important the rabbis thought it was. He says everything, right, he made them give charity. And Abai said, but didn't Shmuel Bar Yehuda bring this braita that says you don't make orphans give charity even for pidyon shvuyim, which is, let's say, the highest level of charity, the highest, most important thing to give. Even orphans don't have to give. If we have a hostage situation, we need to collect money. We don't ask from orphans. So how did you force these orphans to give money? To which Rabbi answered, Amar le ana la'achu shvinu kavina, la'chshuvinu. I did it so that they would be considered important in the eyes of others. Now, this is a wealthy family of orphans, and I wanted people to look up to them, and therefore I insisted they give it. It was for their own sake. It wasn't for the sake of giving charity to others. It was so that they would look good in the eyes of others. That's why I had different motives. It's not like the usual case. Ifra Hormes Ime de Shabra Malka. Remember her? She's the mother of Shabra Malka. The last time we started giving charity, right? And the rabbis wouldn't collect from her. So, right, did we see this before? Or did I prepare it ahead of time? Now I can't even remember. Get confused because I prepared Friday and Sunday. I can't remember. Oh, maybe it comes out. Yeah, you know what? It's going to come up on Daf Yud. Sorry. Okay. So Ifra Hormes, we're going to see her again. Okay, let's put it that way. Let's reverse my statement. We're going to see her again giving charity to the Jewish people. Ifra Hormes, Ime de Shabra Malka, the mother of the Shabra Malka, Shadara Arnaka de Dinari Lakame de Rav Yosef. She gave, remember, he was the Persian king. She gave money, a wallet to Rav Yosef full of dinarim. Amra lehave lemitzvah rabba. She said, I want this to be for a big mitzvah. Yosef Rav Yosef, but kama ayin ba. Rav Yosef sat there thinking, like, okay, what's the code word? What does that mean? Mitzvah rabba. My mitzvah rabba. Sitting there thinking, Amar le Abaye. Abaye's student comes up to him and says, what do you mean? Miditane Rav Shmor bar Yehuda. This line we just says it all. Ein poskim stakali tomim afilu lepidyon shvuyim. Shmami, now what can you infer from there? Now turning to Amud Bet. Pidyon shvuyim mitzvah rabbahi. That's mitzvah rabba. And therefore her money must have been meant for pidyon shvuyim, right? Obviously, Rav Yosef was too embarrassed to go to her, and it wasn't appropriate. She was the mother of the king, right? To start asking, what did you mean? But Abaye says, no, it's obvious. Pidyon shvuyim, because what could be more important than that, right? Again, what kind of message more important these days than to hear this line and to hear this sugya? Amar le Rava le Rabba bar Mary. Okay, this is going to get a little difficult, what we're going to see in light of what's going on today. So Rava says to Rabba bar Mary, Menaha milta da Amar Rabbanan de Pidyon shvuyim mitzvah Rabba. How do we know this? Amar le. So he answers him, Dichtiv v'haya ki yomru elecha. Anat Netze. Okay, here's a pasuk we're quoting now from Yirmiyahu, and it says, when they say to you, how are we going to go? How are we going to die? Ba'amarta alehem, you should say to them, Kama Hashem. This is what God said. Asher lamavet lamavet, those who were decreed to die will die. Death here means a natural death. Asher lacherev lacherev, those who will die by the sword will die by the sword. Asher larav larav, those who will die by famine. Again, those who are decreed to die by famine will die by famine. Asher l'shvi l'shevi, and those who are going to die in captivity will die in captivity. Ka'amar Rabbi Yochanan. Or, by the way, it doesn't necessarily mean to die. It could mean those who will be taken into captivity will be taken into captivity. Rabbi Yochanan said this pasuk is designed in order of severity. And the more the pasuk goes, the more severe it goes. And now he's going to prove each one. The sword is more difficult than death. Why? You can prove it by a pasuk, and you can prove it by logic. Why logic? Well, if you get killed by the sword, that's a more disgraceful death. If you die in bed, it's not really disgraceful. It's bad you died, but it's not a disgusting death. Or a pasuk, yakal be'enei Hashem hamavta lechasidav. What do you see here? The mavet, which we assume is death by natural causes, is the method of death for the chasidim. Right there, yakar be'enei Hashem, they're valued in the eyes of God, and therefore they die a death, the best death there is. Ra'av kashem icherev. So now we go to number 2 and 3. Well, how do we know 3 is harder, more severe than 2? Again, ibayit emasfara, you should probably add the words ibayit emasfara, ibayit emakha, because they're going to give both, even though those words are missing, the Bach puts them back in. So let's explain. Hi kamitstar, so ibayit emasfara, why is it logical? Hi kamitstar, hi lo kamitstar. There's a lot more suffering when you die of famine. It's a more right? It takes time. It's a lot more suffering than it is to die of the sword, which is fairly quick. Well, there's a pasuk from Echad that says, Tovim hayu chalalei cherev mi chalalei rav. When it describes the Korban, it says it was better those who died by the sword than those who died by famine. So there you have it explicitly in a pasuk. And here's the difficult line for us. Shvi kashem kulam. Being taken into captivity is the worst of all. Dekulu idnehube, because it has all these elements in it. In other words, people are can die for different reasons. There's starvation. There's suffering. There's nivul. It's disgraceful. It's all of these things. Unfortunately, are tied in with Chevy, and unfortunately, this is really so prevalent to us nowadays. And this is why, right? Again, this was all to prove how we know the order of this pasuk is which is more serious, which is more severe than the others, which is why how we know the Pidyon Shvuyim is the mitzvah rabbah, is the greatest mitzvah of all, the most important thing to give money to. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. And like I said, you can listen to Din and Daf that'll hopefully go up later today, which really delves into this topic of Pidyon Shvuyim, much more in depth and recommended listening. Tanu Rabbanan. Kupa shel tzedakah nigbeit b'shnayim u'mitchaleket b'shlosha. If we already mentioned before in this braita about how much time you need to be in a city to start giving to the tamchoy, to the kupa, now we're going to talk about some things about the kupa of tzedakah, collecting the money. When you collect the money, and this is going to be one of these sugyot, you're not going to really fully understand everything. Now we're going to quote this long braita, and then we're going to go into all the different parts of the braita. So kupa shel tzedakah nigbeit b'shnayim u'mitchaleket b'shlosha. When you collect charity, you collect with 2 people, and you give it out with 3 people. Nigbeit b'shnayim, why with 2? She'ein osim srarut ala tzibor pachot mishnayim. You can't exhibit authority over people in money issues without 2 people. You need a minimum of 2 people to exert your authority in monetary issues. Okay, it's a little bit strange. We're going to have to see later. Why is collecting charity exerting your authority? Not exactly what I would have defined it as. So the Gemara will get back to that. We'll wait to see. And it's mitchaleket b'shlosha k'dinei mamonot. Because what does it mean to distribute charity? You have to determine who's poor, who's not. That's really like a decision of the court about money, right? Who gets money and who doesn't, right? Just like you have to decide between one who claims this is theirs and one who claims it's theirs. The court also has to determine who gets charity, which means we're taking from one and giving it to somebody else, basically. So for that, you need 3, just like any court of mamonot needs 3. When it comes to the tamchoy, the soup kitchen, you collect the food with 3 people and give it out with 3 people. It seems a little strange. Why would you need more people to do this? Well, it's because you do the tamchoy every day. You collect the food and you give it out in the same day. So if we collected it with 2 and then you need to find a third to distribute it, it would delay things. So we want to just have it from the beginning, just start with 3 so that you already have 3 so you can to give it out right away. Again, without refrigeration, it was really important to give food away right away before it got ruined. Tamchoy before it spoiled. Tamchoy b'chol yom, kupa me'erev Shabbat erev Shabbat. So the tamchoy was distributed every day, whereas, as I mentioned before, the kupa was money that they gave out once a week, a weekly stipend to the poor people. Tamchoy la'aniyei olam, here are more differences. The soup kitchen is open to everybody, even poor people from other cities. But the money they would give, the weekly stipend, went specifically to people in the town. But if the people in the city saw that we have way too many poor people, and if we feed the poor people from the next door town in our soup kitchen, we won't have enough to support our own people, then they can limit the tamchoy just like the kupa is limited. And in the reverse, if they see that we have enough money to distribute, they can decide to take the kupa and give to other people, right? That's why they call things a discretionary fund, right? They have discretion to decide what to do with it. It talks about the people of the city who decides. It's a good question. I assume they don't take a vote of everybody in the city. Oh, sorry, I skipped one line. They can also change. They can say, oh, this was for charity. We need it for something else. We need it to build the city wall. We need it for something. They're allowed to do that as they see fit. There's another thing that people can do that can decide about these 4 things. Number 1, they can decide that the measurements are changing. We've seen that the measurements change, like even though nowadays, right, a kilo is a kilo, a pound is a pound. But in those days, sometimes they use different measures. They would call this a kilo, and they would use like a kilo and a little more would be a kilo, which would affect, I guess, the prices and things like that, which really makes it seem kind of one and the same as the next, which is they can change the shah. They can say, now bread's going to go for, right? They can change the prices of items or what wheat is going to cost in the shuk. They can change that. Schar poalim, they can decide what's minimum wage or, that we're lowering or raising minimum wage. And they can fine people if they don't keep to these rules. Amar mar. Okay, that was the end of this long braita, which had a lot of different topics in it. Now we're going to go back and try to understand, particularly this issue of schara and what does that have to do with collecting money. So first of all, how do you know that when it comes to collecting money with authority that you have to do with two people? This is when they collected the gold for the temple, for the Mishkan, when they were building the Mishkan in the Sefer Shemot. It says, in plural, two people. Now they say, okay, what this is saying is you need two for authority purposes, not for trustworthy issues. Meaning, you would have thought that why do we collect charity? If I hadn't seen this figure, I would have assumed if it said two people to collect. So you want to make sure that one person's not sticking the money in their pocket, right? You have two people, there's a check system here to make sure people are being honest. But that's not the reason. It says shrara and not having anything to do with trustworthiness. And in fact, how do we know this is true? Rebbe put two brothers in charge of the kupan. Now, two brothers is like one when it comes to trustworthiness, because two brothers could work together and put the money in their pocket and they wouldn't tell anybody, right? One brother wouldn't tell on the other because they're brothers. So that shows it's not a ne'emanut issue, a trustworthy issue. It's an honesty issue. It's really having to do with the shrara, which we haven't yet understood, which the Gemara now asks, why is this an issue of authority? Interesting. They can force people to give charity. And if you don't give charity, even if they come to your house on Erev Shabbat and you say, listen, I'm busy, come back tomorrow or tomorrow night or Sunday morning, they can actually seize something of collateral from your house, seize an item for collateral, and insist that you pay the charity, right? And they won't give it back to you till you pay charity. Okay, now this is where Gefet gets up and like, what do you mean you force people to give charity? And there's some sugya that says you can't. So anyway, that's a whole question in of itself, this idea about forcing, but it seems from here that it's not a problem to force to give charity. So if you want to learn more about that, listen to Gefet. V'haktiv, now they say, wait a minute, Ini, really? V'haktiv, upakadati al kol lo chatzav. God will punish anyone who pressures people. And Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta Mishmei Derav, what does that mean? Afilu al gaba etzdaka, even on those people who go around door to door and force you to give charity. So it sounds like you're going to get punished if you force people to give charity. So how could you possibly say that? Now we learn, well, it's only for wealthy people. If you go to wealthy people, you can force them. If it's not wealthy people, you can't force them. How you define what wealth is, that's a good question. We have a case where Rava forced this obviously wealthy person. We'll see why he was obviously wealthy, because he forced him to give 400 zuz. 400 zuz is salary. We talked about a tuba. It's 200 zuz. That's about living for a year, living expenses for a year. So this is living expenses for 2 years. Obviously, it was a very wealthy person. Now we're going to see what are the benefits what's the rewards that are God is going to give to these people. And this is talking about in the world to come. It's a pasuk from Daniel. Hamaskilim yazhiru b'zohar harakia. The maskilim, the ones who are enlightened, will be, kind of play on words on enlightened, will be shine like the zohar, of like the shining of the firmament. Hamaskilim yazhiru b'zohar harakia zed dayan shadan dinim et lamito. That's a judge who judges truth in a truthful manner. And the continuation of that pasuk is matzdikei harabim kechochavim la'olam va'ed. Okay, we're basically comparing these people to shining things in the sky, right? Constellations and things. So the people who matzdikei harabim, they do righteousness to lots of people, which is charity, they're going to say, are like stars for the rest of, right, forever. Elu gaba etzdaka. So that's the gaba etzdaka. But manitatan, a different brighter, they say, hamaskilim yazhiru kazor akia. That is dayan shedan din emet lamito v'gaba etzdaka. Gaba etzdaka are included in the first part of the pasuk. They're all the maskilim. What's matzdikei rabim chavim la'olam ve'ed? These are milamdei tinokot, teachers of young children. They're the ones who are also going to get rewarded. Kigon man, like who? Give us an example. Amarav. Kigon Rav Chama bar Shila. We have an interesting story. The Rav Eshkached Rav Chama bar Shila davakai beginta. He saw him sitting in his garden. Hamarle shevakte lehemanutach. What, did you leave your job? Like what are you doing? Where are your students? You're sitting in your garden. Amarle hat leser shnin delo chazili. I haven't sat in my garden for 13 years. I'm a very dedicated teacher. All I do is teach. I'm finally today sitting in my garden, and don't worry, hashtanami da'atai leveh. I still can't get them out of my mind. I'm still thinking about my students. This is a teacher who's really, really dedicated. So here comes the great question. After all these people get rewarded, what about the rabbis? What, they don't get rewards like this? And we want to be like the stars or like the firmament? It says, don't worry. Amar Ravina, Ohavav, Kitset Hashemesh B'Gvurato. Totally different pasuk in a different place in Shoftim. But what does this say? The ones who love God, right, or God's, those who he loves, are like the sun coming out in its glory. They're the brightest of all, and that's the rabbis. So don't worry. You also get your reward. Tanu Rabbanan. Back to the issue of Kabbalah Tzedakah. Here, even though we said you don't need two for Ne'emanut, we do see that collecting charity is a job that people suspect you all the time of not using money right. And unfortunately, we see that this happens many times. People misuse charity funds, and therefore you should be really careful if you're collecting charity to make sure nobody suspects you of anything. So what should you do to prevent that? First of all, don't split the two of you. Always be together. If you're at a small distance from each other, you can, but don't split off and go on your own. If you find money on the street, don't put it in your pocket when you're out collecting charity. Put it in your tzedakah pouch, and then take it out when you get home. But it looks bad. People are going to think that you're putting charity money in your own pocket. Pocket doesn't mean pocket. It means like money bag. Like this also, likewise. If someone owed you money and you see them in the shuk when you're out collecting charity money, and he pays you back out in public, so don't put it in your money bag. Same thing, put it in your charity bag, and then you'll take it out after, because otherwise people will suspect you. If you don't have people and you have all these teeny little coins, you want to change them into a big coin, because otherwise they might rot. The small coins rotted quickly, so you want to change them, but don't change them with yourself, because you might make a mistake and it'll favor you. And you might have ulterior motives here. But go change it with somebody else. Likewise, if you're in charge of the food, so what are you going to do with that food, extra food? Sell it to others, but not don't sell it to yourself and put money in the kuppah. Because again, it doesn't look good. Don't count them two at a time, because you might make a mistake. Again, there's a few different reasons why, but that's one of the reasons given. Explanations. Last line for today. I wouldn't sit on the mats in the shul, because I didn't want to use, I knew charity money went to support that, and I didn't want to benefit from charity. But since I heard that part of the Breita, then later it said that the charity collectors can change, and or the people in the city can decide they want to use it for anything they need. Then I realized I could sit on these mats and I could use them, because I'm not really benefiting from charity. Okay, let's review our daf very quickly. I know it's late, but we started with the issue of really the taxes, who pays taxes, who is exempt from taxes, the orphans, and all the issues that arise from that. We got to the importance of, we had the story with Rebbe, who didn't want to give charity to Amei Haaretz and then changed his mind about it, because all the Puranut comes because of the Amei Haaretz. We saw some stories about that. Then we talked about the inhabitants of the city, how long you need to be an inhabitant for various issues. From that, we got into charity. From that, we got into the importance of Pidyon Shvuyim. That's the most important charity you could give money to. And then we talked about how you collect money, 2 people, 3 people, and we have this long Breita, which we started already trying to explain why collecting money is shrara, is authority, because you can actually seize collaterals from people. Is that really okay? We saw it wasn't okay, and then we said it depends who you're taking it from, how wealthy they are. And then we talked about ways to protect yourself if you're a charity collector from people suspecting you of taking the money for yourself. A lot of interesting ideas. As I said, we're going to continue in these charity sugas for a few more dapim. So this is what we've got for the next while, which makes the dapim a lot longer, because they're not Gemara type sugas, but also very interesting and relevant. Wishing everybody a good day. And on the note of today, hoping for B'Salat Tovot.